Okay, so BCS, you've identified a number of trends for the data center industry for 2025, if you like. I guess it'd just be good to go through some of those, with you sharing some of your thoughts on that. And the world and his wife is talking about artificial intelligence. So I think artificial intelligence integration is the particular thing you want to focus on. But yeah, tell us more, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously the buzzword that's going around at the moment. It's getting everybody excited. And there are a number of strands to this. There's the AI, the machine learning, which needs to be close to center. And then there's the large language models, which take the massive processing power and increase in energy demand. And and kind of what we're seeing is a race around those large language models in trying to deliver space. But the underlying problem this year is that they've not really been monetized. So how that's actually taken to market is causing a bit of angst and a bit of a challenge within the sector. We've just seen that actually with Microsoft. They've taken a step back. They've cancelled a few leases. They're just taking stock of where their AI investment is going and how that's being monetized and how that's being taken to market. Now, I fully expect that to come back in, but what it's going to cause is a bit of a plateau while that potential space is taken up elsewhere, which it will be. And we're seeing that now. It's actually happening. But what would be more interesting is that as that space is taken up and Microsoft then come back into the market, what are the implications then? Because again, I think that's going to put a bit more strain on an already constrained market. But what we are seeing from it, obviously, is a lot of talk around the advanced cooling solutions that are coming in, the liquid to liquid cooling, which at this day and age is largely an untried technology. But again, we've got to remember back in the 60s and 70s, that's how we cooled down our servers. So we're taking a step back to go forward, if you like. But again, it's just getting those models, those approaches on market, so they're tested, so we can actually install them and get them up and running. It's also really driving the growth around edge data centers. I referred earlier on to kind of the AI-driven applications that require really low latency, so kind of the automation, the machine learning type applications. And what we're seeing there is a repurposing of older stock to accommodate this, and also the advent of actually another push towards kind of that modular design, that containerized design, so you can deploy quickly, deploy on a lesser footprint, and deploy in urban areas close to the need.
Okay, and just on the large language model side of things, the sort of temporary pause you outlined there, is that as simple as when DeepSeek sort of announced what they did? Did everyone suddenly go, "Whoa, maybe there's a different way of doing this. We don't need quite so much, compute power, etc." Or was it unrelated, or was that part of why people have taken a bit of a different view? I don't know. Any
It
thoughts?
certainly spooked investors, but as you delve further into DeepSeek and actually how it's been derived and provided, so they talk about kind of the 1600 advanced GPU processors rather than the kind of the 15,000. But if you underlie that and how it's been developed, it still needs an inordinate amount of processing power, whether that's on a kind of a second type or third generation type CPU. It's largely ripped off the OpenAI systems that are out there anyway, so it's used that as its development base rather than what the big four are doing, which is developing their own models. So it's a totally different approach. So I think from kind of an investor point of view, yeah, absolutely, because actually if you can do it cheaper, then why not? But to do it cheaper, you need those models in place to build off, to use as a base to develop. So I think you're kind of in that space at the moment where we're just getting over that. But I think the biggest issue around it actually is the monetization of those large language models. So how is income generated? What's the price point going into the market? How are you going to stimulate that take up? And that's probably going to be 6 months to a year away in terms of making sure they've got those price points. Look, and listen, Google and AWS went through it in the last 24 months. Microsoft are going through it now. It's new technology. They're learning on the hoof. And they've got to marry that up with trying to get to market first. So what you're seeing is this big bow wave, this big splurge. We've got to get there. We've got to get there. Then there's a bit of a break. Okay, how we're going to develop the model, how we're going to monetize this, how we're going to take it to market. Once they've figured that out, again, it'll go again.
Okay, and maybe if AI is number one on everyone's list, I guess we could have said until fairly recently sustainability and green initiatives were pretty much there. Clearly, there's some pushback, shall we say, from various sources as to. I don't think anyone perhaps denies that climate change exists, but it's more whether it should be allowed to get in the way of progress in terms of AI, business, etc. Do you have any thoughts as to if that sort of pushback is being seen or might be seen, bearing in mind, to the talk about AI, obviously there's a lot of money washing around and the financial folks are perhaps joining the pushback to a certain extent. Just your thoughts, I suppose, as to will sustainability and green initiatives continue to be front and center, or might they take a little bit of a backseat as the AI push and just business is the number one priority for folks?
Yeah, again, as with everything, there's a number of strands to this. So, you could argue the fact that kind of green initiatives, sustainability, in and of itself was never a driver, in that the drive to make your data centers more efficient, to make sure that you're using power more effectively, making sure you've got that renewable, sustainable power, because in the commercial long term, it's always going to be cheaper. That was a big driver in those sustainability and green issues. Now, not to say that absolutely the data center sector takes it seriously, because they do. If you look at the initiatives that have been brought about, the openness and transparency that's now coming in terms of the communications and what we're doing, it's far better than it was 3 years ago and 5 years ago. Now, you're seeing a lot of statistics out there in the marketplace at the moment, and data centers are using between 1 and 1.5% of the global energy production. I think I saw a statistic that actually in Ireland, data centers are using 21% of the total energy production there. So obviously from that point of view, the figures don't look good. However, that said, this is where we are. It's not going to stop. So we have to work collectively to find answers to this. And the answers are through kind of those renewable energy initiatives, maybe self-generation, looking down the line, SMRs and things of that nature. What I think it will do is actually get people coming together and starting talking about how we marry up the data centers with energy production facilities. And you're already seeing the moves from the likes of Google to buy into utilities in order that they can influence, that they can actually work hand in hand with the energy providers, in that they are not putting greater challenges on the grid. They're taking that off grid, self-delivering to a certain extent. So there are initiatives out there that are working, but as per normal with the data center industry, we're not shouting about it. We've been very quiet about it.
Okay, because I know, again, you can kind of find evidence to support whatever point of view you want, but I think the power consumption of data centers is due to almost, is it double or something fairly frightening by the early 2030s or something like that, which again doesn't sound desperately sustainable. But
yeah, so by 2030, absolutely. You're looking at, on current projections, 3% of the global energy production going into data centers. And that has to be addressed. We have to look at that. But again, I think collectively we are. So again, you look at somewhere like Africa, for example, as an example. They're coming together as a continent to solve that conundrum. The European Union is slowly moving in that direction. They've got the directives, the 2030, and all that kind of good stuff. But we're still kind of suffering from that point of view that there are still a lot of server huggers out there. So instead of going to the places that have power, so for example, the UK, Scotland, load of power, but getting data centers built up there has perennially been a massive challenge. So I think we're going to have to change the way we think in terms of moving to where the power is, rather than building data centers and then thinking about how do we get there.
well, fair enough. And in terms of building data centers, one other thing I think you looking at is modular and scalable designs. potentially nothing, new as a concept, but what is it that particularly sort of intrigues you in terms of how that market will be, developing during the next 12, 18 months?
So, to my mind, there are two aspects to this. There's the first aspect of the fact that, yes, we are seeing more modular and scalable design, but that's only going to be sustainable through volume. If you don't have the volume there, you don't have the predictability in terms of supply, then it becomes very, very expensive, and actually nobody wants to use it. So it's got to be put into an application whereby we can see an extended pipeline, there is repeatability, and there is volume that goes beyond that. And we're seeing that probably in the edge sector at this moment in time, which lends itself perfectly to it, because, as I say, fast deployment, containers, getting close to source. The other aspect of it is the industry as a whole, is that what we have is that we have CAGRs over the next 5 years or so of something like anywhere between kind of 7 and 20%, depending on which reports you read. And my personal opinion is it's somewhere between the two, probably around about 15%. We're already suffering from shortages of specialists, from experts, from resource. So we've got to think of different ways in order that we can do things more efficiently. So if you think of it from that point of view, in the fact that we can do more with less, do it more efficiently, with less waste, then obviously that's got to be part of the answer to address the skills shortage.
And in terms of modular, you referenced the edge. Is that the sweet spot? Because obviously modular can apply equally well to the larger data center models, huge great things being delivered on site, bolted together. So is that also, things happening there, or is it mainly just this edge?
That's where we're seeing most of the movement at this moment in time. I mean, there's been talk around, as you all know, scalable, modular, design for manufacturer for years and years and years. But again, it comes down to the volume and repeatability of what you want to do. Now, I think with the standardization of designs, it becomes more apparent, but you're limited really to transport. So you can only build these modules to a certain size. And to make it economically effective, it comes down to what volume you can get into those modules. So if you look at a data center, a run-of-the-mill hyperscale data center, then actually the pipe work, the wiring looms that go into that module, it's not that dense. However, with increased densities in the AI arena, we may be looking at plant rooms that are far more dense in terms of packed out of that infrastructure. So again, that might well lend itself in future to more of a modular approach.
Okay, and I think you've already mentioned liquid cooling, but advanced cooling technologies, I'm assuming you're meaning mainly liquid cooling, although I think I can't remember, there are other sort of potential ideas out there. Just your thoughts, I suppose. Is the whole world moving to liquid? Are we coming a hybrid cooling, so where air makes sense, we'll continue with that, and liquid can do the high density stuff? Just your thoughts, I suppose, as to
so if you're talking to me about this 3 months ago, I'd have said liquid cooling. Everybody's rushing towards liquid cooling, and with the densities we're talking about, and certainly in the AI arena, the efficiencies that we want to produce, looking at PUE, energy efficiency, the green initiatives, absolutely it makes sense. But it's still a relative new technology for this generation. So it's still a bit of proof of concept that needs to go in before it's rolled out on a large scale. Now, I talked a bit earlier about kind of this blip in terms of the race to deploy the AI space and just taking a bit of a backward step. And actually, what that has done is given a pause for thought in terms of how we design data centers. So what we're seeing now is a bigger step towards these hybrid models that will have or can facilitate liquid cooling and liquid air cooling, which gives a greater flexibility, obviously, in the data center model itself. But I think that's what you're going to see more of, certainly in the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay, and in terms of edge computing, which again you've referenced around the AI applications, but as well, I know we've talked in the past, the definition of edge, you get 100 people in the room and they'll all have 100 different definitions. So when you're talking about edge computing expansion, are we talking sort of small scale, local? We're talking regional, some of these tier two areas that are developing, like, I don't know, Portugal, stuff like that. Just what you think is how you define your edge, if you like, and what's going on there.
Depends which client I'm talking to.
Oh, fair enough.
But essentially, in terms of a very wide definition, it is where it's closer to the applications it's deploying. So if you think of it in terms of that, so again, what we're seeing is that there's a decentralization in terms of how these things are deployed. So you're looking very much on a hub and spoke system. So you'll have the big hyperscale data center, and off that, that'll be used for kind of the storage and the slower processing stuff, and that'll be fed by these edge data centers, which will be absolutely around low latency applications, but then feed back the data into these hubs. And we're seeing this come in a few different models. So the main two really at the moment, absolutely, there's the containerized kind of solution. Again, that is where we've got tight space. We need to get it into urban areas, and speed is of the essence. And then actually what we're also seeing is repurposing of older stock, where can't really be used for mainstream data centers because the densities that they were designed for are a lot less than they are today. But actually we can repurpose them for kind of these edge facilities where we can drop in containers, we can drop in these modular concepts, and we're up away and we're running. And we've been talking about edge being the coming thing for probably the last five years or so. And it's a bit like cloud was. There's a lot of talk, and bang, it was just going in. And I think we're kind of at that inflection point now with edge data centers. We're starting to see a momentum build. We're starting to see more and more new entrants into the market. We're seeing more buying of what we'd probably call older distressed facilities that are being repurposed for an edge approach. And I see that continuing.
And also, I mean, there's talk of, and I think there are one or two examples of the idea of data centers being built as the hub of a community. So you build maybe a new town or whatever, or an industrial estate, and you put a data center as the sort of the central bit of infrastructure, and then houses, schools, everything, industry comes around. Is that sort of pie in the sky, or do you think there is potentially some substance to that moving forward?
I think there needs to be a lot of PR done before we get to that point. It's an interesting thing because essentially what we're talking about there is data centers as an energy center and then feeding off a district heating scheme. So when I first started out in my career, I spent the first portion of my career actually dismantling district heating schemes. And now we come full circle, we're trying to put them back in. But again, if you look on the continent, places like Germany, Denmark, certainly in Northern Europe, where they have the district heating schemes, then there is a push for data centers to plug into those. The issue obviously is around the fact that the grade of heat that you're taking from the data centers, which has traditionally been quite low grade, but nevertheless, we're now getting the technology there and the heat recovery systems that can actually boost that. So it's now a plus putting them into there. In the UK, it is an issue because we don't have the infrastructure to do that. So we've had various news stories about warming up swimming pools and things of that nature, and we'll see those continue. The central concept of the data center being part of a wider energy center, I think actually it's probably got to happen at some stage, simply to facilitate the energy that's required and making sure we're using it to its absolute best. But if you ask a parent, do they want their kids going to school right next to a data center? Don't know what that answer would be. Do you want to be living right next to a data center? Probably not. And that's around PR. How can we make it more attractive? How can we make it more attractive in that environment? How can we bring people along on the journey?
And maybe part of that is again with the edge, because with the power availability constraints, which I don't think we've talked about, there's the suggestion that more and more data centers might build their own power supplies, microgrids, and then at some point plug those into the network rather than wait for the network to build the infrastructure, to plug into data centers. Do you see any mileage in that
Yes.
on a sort of large scale, or will that just be sort of scattered projects here and there?
I think on the big campuses, it's inevitable. So you're now approaching the 1 gigawatt campuses. It's quite interesting. Many years ago, I started helping Google in their European data centers when they first moved across to Europe, building in Europe. And we were doing a development in Hamina in Finland. And I asked that question then, and this was probably back in 2008, 2009. Why don't you self-generate? Well, we'll never get that big. It'll never happen. There'll be no need. And the inflection point they said then was about 1 gigawatt. Now you're getting campuses now of one gigawatt. And the question has to be, certainly for a grid in the UK or Europe, can they support that in that density? Probably not. So what's the next option? You're going to have to look at some kind of self-generation. So the SMRs, whatever form it takes, will happen. And I think that will happen within the next 5 years.
Okay, and in terms of shaping the industry, obviously the industry itself has a lot of momentum, a lot of ideas, etc. But governments clearly, bump into our own as declared data centers as critical national infrastructure. There's also security considerations. So, I guess your thoughts as to and I know we've chatted about it previously, but how much government should encroach into the industry, and I suppose, and how much it can trust the industry to do the right things in the right speed, etc. Just where should the two come together, if at all, I suppose?
My view is that the government should encourage and go no further. I think whenever any government gets involved in legislation, with the best intentions, it always has negative effects. And actually what happens is people just try and find a way around that legislation rather than investing in taking it forward. So from my view is listen to the experts, bring them closer to you, understand the issues clearly, and take that advice on board. Now, as I said quite a few times, I think the data center sector actually is quite forward thinking in terms of addressing these issues, probably way ahead of any other high energy sector out there. And yes, there's the ESG aspect. Yes, there's the regulation aspect, but also the fact to remain competitive, they need to do these things. They need to constantly invest in this, and they need to take that forward. So that has its own momentum. Now, there's always going to be a temptation for governments to interfere, to take a bit of limelight, and the national critical infrastructure thing is absolutely an example of that. It's welcome, don't get me wrong, but it's the wrong focus. The issue is power. You can have all the planning you like, we can grant all the applications you want, but if you haven't got the power there, it's irrelevant. So again, it's about understanding the holistic approach, what needs to happen, and really taking a step together and making sure that we understand the pathway, we understand the framework, and everybody then understands the objectives and the implications of not doing something.
Okay, so I guess more understanding from governments, which I mean, from my experience of other industry sectors as well, it would always be welcome.
Yeah.
But more of a carrot than a stick as well. Is that fair to say? So rather than putting in regulations and potential obstacles, they should maybe be incentivizing and encouraging folks to do certain things, because it's good for obviously the industry, but also the wider country, society, whatever. Is that the way forward, do you think?
My belief is, I mean, we're in a race. Okay, this is the second industrial revolution. This is absolutely going to revolutionize the way we work, the way we live, and it's going to complement it all. Now, we have a choice. We can either be on the sidelines chasing, or actually, with the intelligence that we have within this country, within Europe, we can be pace setters. And to do that, we need to be allowed to set that pace and bring the governments with us, rather than the governments thinking that they're helping, but actually increasing more barriers. So absolutely that collaborative approach. And yes, I get the fact that there are political dimensions to this, which are way beyond myself, but nevertheless, if you look at what is happening, where the investment's going, it's got to be encouraged.
And I suppose part of that takes us on to maybe the last big topic, which I think we talked about virtually every time we catch up, which is talent acquisition, workforce development. The likes of you and I are not getting any younger, and there's large amounts of us that at some stage might decide that there are better things to do than carry on working. No. So the aging workforce, etc. Everyone knows about it. Everyone says there's potentially a big problem, but I don't, see anyone sort of panicking crisis. I know from my semiconductor industry, there are delays to projects. I don't know if data center builds are being delayed because there aren't enough people to either build them or populate them when they're there. Just your thoughts as to how big a problem is, and I suppose to our previous point, what can government do with STEM subjects, whatever it is? How can they somehow encourage the next generation or two to get more involved in technology, whether or not that's AI, data centers, whatever? Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, we feel it. There is a talent shortage. So I feel we need to think laterally about how we solve this, because again, I mentioned kind of the growth of the industry. It's going to outpace the amount of people we can bring in. You just look at the numbers. It's just the way it is. So therefore, we've just got to think differently about the way we go things. AI is one of those solutions. Absolutely, we're doing it here. And actually, and it's simple things. If you save 30 seconds on a process and you're doing that process 4 or 5 times a day, and then you add it up over the year, you're saving days. Now, if you can just build that through the business, then again, the efficiencies speak for themselves. I think we've got to make ourselves more attractive. We just don't do that. We never have. We've not been very good at it, but it's about that, getting into the schools, creating that excitement around what we do. And it's really conveying the fact that without us, life as we understand it, as it is at the moment, won't work. We are the engine room, we are the heartbeat of society. We're that important. So we've got to get that across, make it exciting, and really make it attractive for people coming in. I think in terms of kind of the whole apprenticeship approach, whilst there is help there, again, how can we really incentivize that to I mean, we have something like 15% of our entire workforce are apprentices, which for a company like ourselves is a massive investment. But we see it as the only way actually to bring people in the industry and create that talent pool. We've looking at talent wherever it is. So we're bringing in ex-athletes, for example. So again, it's that thinking laterally about how you can bring people in that are going to take you forward. But to your point, that can only work while you've got the mentors in place. So us grey heads that want to go off and disappear into the distance, what we're trying to say is, actually, can you just put a break on that and just sit with the people that are coming through? Don't want you to do service delivery. All I want you to do, sit with them and just get that experience, that knowledge across to them. There's got to be more of that. And finally, we've got to look at the way we're working, the way we approach it. The traditional approach is, are resource heavy. We're not taking full advantage of the technology around us, and we're not learning from other industries that do things far more efficiently. So again, we've got to broaden our view, take on new ways of working, and start to embrace that. But we will find a way. We always do. We always have. I am absolutely confident of that. And we have to solve this issue. So again, it's that more collaborative approach in terms of, let's welcome other ideas from other industries. What is it we can use? Let's work with government to incentivize the apprenticeship schemes, the learning schemes, actually repurposing people, reskilling people. Again, taking them from industries in decline. How can we bring them into ours and get them up and running and things of that nature? So again, it has to be a holistic approach. There's not going to be any one bullet that's going to fix it, but it's a wider view in terms of how we bring it all together.
And do whether it's in hindsight or whatever, do you think the pandemic was a bit of a missed opportunity because everyone talked about the IT industry, data center industry as the fourth emergency service, which was basically keeping us all, at some kind of level of work in our own homes, etc. And instead of sort of off the back of that, telling everyone what a fantastic job they were doing. Hopefully people realise, but promoting it more and more and getting people, it kind of once everyone, got back to some kind of normal, it didn't go away, but everyone took it for granted again. So do you think there needs to be some kind of almost national campaign, whatever it is, just to be in people's faces that, when you buy a train ticket, whatever you do, you look at your mobile phone websites on there, whatever, there's a data center behind all this. And as
Yeah.
explained a few minutes ago, without it, the world grinds to a fairly spectacular halt. So how do you convey that message to folks, and therefore the excitement of being involved in such a, to the government's point, critical national infrastructure, mission critical industry?
Yeah. I mean, you raised the point there about COVID and how we could have leveraged that, and we haven't. And it's typical fashion, data center industry. Well, this is what we do, so it's not that special. Well, actually, it is. Nothing works without the data centers these days. And it's interesting. I was confronted by a climate protester about data centers, and I turned around to them and asked them, "So, how did you arrange this event?" I said, "Well, it's on my mobile phone." Right, okay, fine. And presumably you got a group together. How did you get together? Oh, on my laptop through email. All right. Do you watch Netflix? Yeah. Well, none of that works without a data center. If you want to take that away, fine. Then we don't have data centers. But this is the lifestyle you have. This is the way you live. So we have to work together to come to a solution, that's going to solve all the issues and challenges out there. But that's what needs to happen. Protest of itself is not going to change things. We need to come together. But absolutely, again, I used to go into schools, and I used to give presentations to school children, and I'd go on after the likes of Microsoft and Google, and they were really sexy. And I'd go on and say, well, we build data centers. And you could see them just switching off. And I had a bit of a light bulb moment, and I was sitting there and I realized, actually, there is something fundamental here. And the next one I went to, they gave all their jazzy presentations, absolutely fantastic, loved it. I went on, and all I said is, without us, they don't exist. And it changed the dynamic of the conversation. And that's what we have to get across. Without us, your lifestyle doesn't exist. So this is where we are. We are that fourth emergency service. We are that important to society. We are that important to business. And people need to understand that.
And just maybe finally on that point, with there's everyone talks about the STEM topics and how to get that more. I mean, I guess government downwards has a responsibility, but what's in your view, what's going wrong? Why aren't more and more people being excited? Because clearly there's a lot of traditional jobs, as you say, are under threat, etc. So presumably there's a lot of folks looking to new opportunities, new directions. Where's the disjoint that they don't sort of bump into data centers as a possible option?
Well, for a start, it's a relatively new industry. So the first data center was back in 1946 through the US Army. You didn't have mainframe rooms till 1964. Wasn't till the 70s really where you started having rudimentary data centers. And then the 80s and 90s when it started coming through with the breakout of the internet and so on and so forth. So the industry in and of itself is relatively young. And I'd say in its current format, it's probably 20, 25 years old. So from that point of view, it is very new. And it's been portrayed very much as a kind of that background infrastructure. It's a bit like substations or, your kind of utilities. It's just there. So we've got to get over that. And what we've got to do, and I think, the education angle is as wide as it is long. I mean, the argument is actually, there's too much choice out there. And looking at some of those courses, do they have any relevance in terms of people's careers, adding back into society? I don't know. That's a debate for somebody else. But I think we probably need a more structured approach in terms of addressing how we want our young to develop. And what I'm not saying is that, look, we chop arts, we go totally STEM. Absolutely, there's a place for everything. But I do think some of those peripheral degrees, are they adding anything? Are they adding any value? Probably not. So let's get realistic about actually is what pathways we're putting out there, and then start really driving the benefits of going down those pathways, which I don't think we do at the moment.
Okay, and in terms of the overall industry future, I mean, we talked about a lot of topics and reference, the power and lack of that might be a bit of a thing. Do you see any potentially big um, threats or problems lying ahead, or are you, I mean, you mentioned once or twice you're reasonably confident that the industry will always, because it always has found a way, or are you worried that there might just be a roadblock, whether it is the lack of power at some stage will constrain the industry, whether that's in particular regions or overall? Yeah, just your thoughts, I suppose, as to whether that glass would be half full, half empty, or neither.
I, where we are at this moment in time, we know what our key issues are, which is obviously the power issues, the energy consumption, and the impact on the climate. Those are probably the three biggest things in front of us at this moment in time. The unknowns, that is the conundrum. You've got issues around geopolitics and what's happening there with carving up deep sea cables and all that kind of stuff. Is that going to have an impact? I think certainly people are thinking about it. But again, I think one of the things in our favour is that we're a relatively young industry, and from that point of view, we're still fairly agile. So we adapt very, very quickly. And I think one of the issues we need to address is if you look at the rate of change of technology and the way that's coming through and the impact it's having on our construction approaches and applications, I think that's something we need to start looking at in terms of how we get that flexibility into these facilities, but without having a massive impact on cost and time.
Okay, and maybe just because you mentioned the geopolitics and clearly a lot of uncertainty out there, but can you, I mean, whether tariffs directly, but can you see the industry becoming more insular, more national, etc., or because of the very nature of what it is, it's going to always be global by and large, or can you see, I say, potentially some fragmenting where everyone kind of, I know Europe's obviously been trying to develop a cloud to rival some of the hyperscalers for quite a while, etc. Can you see those kind of things becoming more important, or as I say, for
Again, I
business
think
reasons, it'll remain global?
Yeah, I think that there's an element of that going on. I mean, certainly there's a bit of a pullback from the big US providers for more investment in the States because of Trump's pronouncements. But fundamentally, these are businesses. So they will follow the profit where the demand is, because if they don't do it, somebody else will. So from that point of view, you may see a change in the landscape in terms of who comes in there, who comes their providers. I think the really interesting thing is to watch out for is if the big American providers do pull back and concentrate on America, that's going to leave space for China. And is that something they necessarily want? I'll suggest not. So at this moment in time, I think it's probably a watch and see, and see what happens. My thinking is that this is probably a bit of reaction to solve the Trump pronouncements, but fundamentally, I think they'll come back. It's a big old market. I think Europe has had a kick up the backside and is actually now starting to operate like a single entity, which you'll need to do to respond to something like this. Because, if we want to be a global presence, if we want to be a global leader, we can't think of it on a country level. You've got to think it on a geographic level. So my hope is, and we've seen it to extent with the defence spending and that kind of stuff, that they'll come together as one. And don't forget, they've announced this 800 billion defence spending, but a lot of that's going to be dependent on data centres.
No, it's been fascinating to chat to you and some really thoughtful insights as to what's going on and where it might be headed as ever, Jim. So really appreciate your time. And
no problem. Just hope it creates a bit of debate. It could be interesting.
Thanks again. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. Cheers, Phil.